Welcome to the Road to Missional Living podcast, where we ask the question, what is God doing through ordinary people to complete His extraordinary work? Each week, we will hear from normal people just like you that have taken a step of faith to follow where God is leading. We pray that their stories will inspire you to take a similar step and see what God will accomplish.
Well, hello and welcome to the Road to Missional Living podcast. My name is Scott Puckett. I'm one of the hosts here on our podcast. And today we're talking about one of the subjects that can make Christians feel excited, guilty, intimidated, and hopeful all at the same time. And that's evangelism. Our special guest today is Laura Daugherty. She wrote an article in the Mission to the World newsletter entitled Everyday Evangelism, Things I Learned as a Missionary. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Laura to introduce more details about herself and take the time right now. We're really glad to have you on the show, Laura. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Yes, my husband and two children and I served in Peru with MTW for about 6 years, from 2015 until 21. And we were part of a church planting team down there. And then at the end of 21, to transition back to the U.S. And so we've been working at our home church since then.
One of the things I loved about the article when I read it is that you begin the article by admitting that evangelism wasn't something that came naturally to you. And I think a lot of our listeners, including myself, can relate to that. What was your relationship with evangelism before you ever moved overseas in the first place?
I would say I definitely felt guilt around that topic. I grew up in the church, had a wonderful believing family. I served as in children's ministry at our church after I was an adult. And so I was really involved in ministry things, but I think I just had this idea that evangelism was like going up to people that you don't know and like giving this excellent presentation of the gospel and convincing them that they should give their lives to Christ. And I just didn't feel like that was me, but I felt guilty about not doing that a lot. And so I think I knew that there's different approaches, but I thought, most of people in my circle are believers. I'm at church all the time, and most of my friends are believers, and I'm just not like striking up interactions with unbelievers that much. But I wanted to be about sharing the gospel. And so I, did that through things like VBS and children's ministry and women's Bible studies. But I definitely felt some like guilt around, I should probably be doing more. I should be better at this.
Yeah. Well, I remember you wrote that one of the biggest shifts was moving from seeing evangelism as an event to seeing it as a way of life. Can you unpack that for us a little bit more?
Yeah, I think through training that MTW offered us, as well as through my experience learning from other missionaries on the field, I came to see it less of, like you said, an event, but more something that I can work into my regular routines. That there's so many activities that we do routinely that are very task-based, and I learned to make those tasks have a relationship aspect to them, that as I go about my regular routines, there are things I can do to lean into the people around me, getting to know them, building relationships, and being honest about my faith. So a lot of those things I learned from watching, from learning, through equipping. The pre-field training that MTW provided for us was wonderful, but it was kind of a shift from it's got to be a huge, big event to this can just happen day in, day out, week in, week out in my regular, normal routine of activities.
Yeah, let me double click on that a little bit. What assumptions about evangelism did you have before becoming a missionary that had to change?
Well, one, I certainly thought that evangelism was like preaching, that I had to have like the presentation and get it right, so that it was convincing. And I've just came to see that that's not the case. I mean, preaching can, obviously be a way to do evangelism, but it doesn't have to be that way. I think I grew in understanding that evangelism is not just presenting information either. It's a lot more than that. You're getting to know real people and their stories and applying the gospel to their story, to their struggles and needs and joys. And it's a lot of it is sharing my story as well, like how the gospel has played out in my life and how I'm trusting, in the Lord right now for the things in my life. I also discovered that it's completely appropriate to not have all the answers when you're sharing the gospel. In fact, it might be for some people even more winsome if you're just honest about certain things that you're still seeking to understand better yourself. If there's certain things that are still a struggle for you as a believer, certain sin struggles that you're still working to conquer. Because I think sometimes if we present the gospel as if we've got it figured out, that just makes it feel unattainable to people and not real. So instead of presenting the gospel as a salesman, more as being alongside that person in seeking truth and seeking to understand and to grow and seeking hope as a real person with, failures and struggles and highs and lows.
Yeah. Well, I think many of us assume that missionaries are naturally gifted evangelists. How did God use the mission field to reshape your understanding of what evangelism actually is?
Well, like I said, there was wonderful trainings that MTW provided for us as we were preparing to go overseas, and they did a great job setting up training that I would have other people alongside me who were learning and heading to the mission field. And so we'd learn from each other about each other's past experiences with evangelism and other topics. And there'd be veteran missionaries that were pouring into us as we were training to go. There were some excellent books that they exposed us to. And then after to Peru, this isn't everyone's situation, but we were part of a missionary team that most of us were pretty involved in each other's lives. We lived in the same community. Most of us were attending and helping with the same church plant. And so I really benefited from just watching them and seeing them, not just on Sunday mornings, but seeing them in their homes interacting with other people, seeing them in our neighborhood playground interacting with people, seeing them in the market, at the grocery store. Just a lot of watching and being a part of how, I benefited from their strengths, I think. And that just felt like such an organic way to be like, okay, I can kind of see how this works. I see how you're doing this naturally, and it doesn't feel like a big presentation.
Well, was that learning process, was that more of a gradual thing, or was there a kind of a light bulb moment where you connected the dots all at once? How did that play out?
Yes and no. I think definitely was gradual. My confidence definitely grew very gradually. I think one of the books that MTW had us read is called Get Real, Sharing Your Everyday Faith Every Day by John Leonard. And that book was definitely a bit of a light bulb moment for me. In fact, probably quite a few of the things that I'm talking about today actually came from that book. So definitely recommend that. But that book really helped me to see how it doesn't have to be an intimidating thing. It can be a natural, everyday thing. One other moment I can think of when we first arrived in Peru and my husband and I were still studying Spanish. We were doing full-time language school. And something from the training had challenged us, even while we're learning language, to practice introducing ourselves to people with the little bits of language that we had. And I remember being so scared, but I told myself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into that convenience store to buy water, and I'm going to introduce myself to the person. And I may not understand a whole lot of what she says back, but I've learned those phrases. And so I did it, and I was terrified, and it went so well. The lady, was so kind, and she could tell that I was a foreigner and learning the language. But that was kind of an encouraging moment to me to realize people don't always just bite your head off. And even if I don't, I don't have the accent right or whatever, just introducing yourself when you're buying something at the store can be the spark of a small little relationship with somebody.
Yeah. Well, that makes me wonder too. Do you think personally that one of the greatest barriers possibly to evangelism in America is simply that we're too rushed to have those kind of conversations in the grocery store?
Rush can certainly be a barrier. I think I would say that a greater barrier than rush, however, would just be lack of intentionality. Because even very busy people, if you're intentional, can lean into relationship, when you go to the grocery store, when you're at your office, when you're at the playground. I have a friend at church now who she's a working professional mom, and I know that she at her office, she intentionally notices when her coworkers share that they're going through something, and she makes a point to later go by their office or their workspace and offer to pray for them. And that's opened up so many opportunities for her because those people learn that she's someone who has a relationship with the Heavenly Father, and they come to her sometimes where she is to ask for prayer. And then, that obviously just opens up all sorts of conversations. And so, and she's one of the probably busiest people I know. I think it just takes creativity and intentionality to make that one of your priorities.
For our listeners today, or those that are watching, what does this look like for a busy parent, for a college student, for a working professional to begin thinking in these terms of intentionality? What would you suggest, or how did that play out for you even personally?
Well, I would first recommend take this desire to the Lord. Tell him that you want to grow in evangelism. Talk it over with him. Express your fears or your doubts or the barriers that you see. Do that first. Secondly, bring it to your spiritual community. I've always experienced the most growth or seen the God meet me the most when I'm willing to be vulnerable and share with my spiritual community. This is something I really want to grow in. Will you pray for me? Will you help me to see the next step? So do that. Then I would look at your life and identify one area where you could lean into relationship. When you could say, this is a routine. Every day I go to the office, or every week I'm going to the grocery store, or regularly I'm at my kids' school, or whatever it is, some routine that puts you in the proximity of other people, and pray that the Lord will open up opportunities for you to introduce yourself. It doesn't have to be, a big, long conversation the first time you interact with somebody. It could just be, hey, I really appreciate you ringing up my groceries with a smile on your face. Or, hey, I'm new to the area. Or, hey, I really appreciate this about your classroom, or whatever it is. Say something about yourself to show that you're a kind person, open to relationship with that other person, and just be intentional in whenever you're in that space to reach out, to lean into relationship. Also, take stock of the relationships that you already have. I feel like it's so easy for us to assume that, we know about other people and they're either they are or are not interested in our faith. But ask yourself, do you really know your coworkers' stories? And if not, reach out to one time and say, hey, so-and-so, I'd really like to hear more of your story. Would you like to get lunch with me sometime, or something like that? Reach out to the people you already know and be curious to get to know them a little bit better. And maybe that opens up an opportunity to share some of your own story and some of the ways that you are growing in your faith now. What your faith, how that has impacted your story. But leaning into relationship on as a regular initiative, I think, is a huge first step.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. And you mentioned just hearing people's story. One of the things that come to mind, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, is sometimes I think we can miss out on the opportunity in telling our own story, because people will typically naturally reciprocate. If you're like, hey, tell me about you, they might say, well, okay, tell me about you. It can be easy for us to think, well, we're trying to show them Christ, or we're trying to show them how good God is, that we can jump to thinking about all the positive things happening in our life and fail to miss the opportunity to be vulnerable maybe and share how we're struggling, which would actually help them be able to relate to us more naturally as a person that's kind of like them. Oh yeah, they struggle with trying to figure out how to, manage a marriage when you've got busy schedules and kids and so on, or they struggle with, work pressure as well, because you're sharing about your struggles with it.
Yeah.
So, has that been your experience too, to see vulnerability play
Yeah.
out that way?
Yes. In fact, I was just thinking earlier, I think some of the people I know who would describe their life as a mess, those people that are kind of harried and in the thick of it, have the most friends circling around them because people relate to that and they feel like this person gets me. And so sometimes the best evangelist is the person who doesn't have it all figured out and it doesn't look pretty, but you're able to be real and share how you're looking to the Lord in your mess.
Well, I think you said some key there, how we're looking to the Lord. I think often we're not trying to do this, but sometimes we can present ourselves as more the hero of our stories rather than God has been the hero of our stories, that he has delivered us. He meets us in our brokenness. That is a very different, I think, way to relate to people when we invite them to know that, oh, I wonder if God would do that for me too. So
Yeah, it takes that intentionality to be more than just commiserating with the other person, to take it to, well, here's what I do when I feel lost, or here's how the Lord is giving me hope in the struggle. Can I pray for you right now? Because sometimes prayer is the only way I get through
yeah.
my heart.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like sometimes we feel like the front door to evangelism, is that we've got to be able to tell people and present the gospel. We got to be able to answer all their hard questions. But honestly, the back door is way easier to invite people just to see the mess in our house, to see our struggles, to see how we're trying to figure it out too, just like them, and how we found that God is faithful, even in the messiest of days and in our own brokenness, can actually be a really much more powerful way to do that. Laura, one of the things you mentioned in the article was describing our homes becoming places of refuge, belonging, and friendship. Why do you think hospitality is such a powerful evangelistic tool?
When I go into someone's home, I get to know them on a whole nother level. I can see what their hobbies are. I can see what type of artwork they have, what books might be on the shelf. I see how they interact with, their family members. And the gospel is not just information, it's invitation into a culture, into a family, into belonging. And so when we invite people into our homes and invite them to belong, to be part of our family for the time that they're with us, we have a very incarnational way of demonstrating the gospel to people. And, they might comment on that picture on the wall or, those flowers in your garden or whatever it is. All those things that they comment about you and your little life and the things in your home can be little windows into talking about your faith. Talk about why you love gardening and how, it's such a delight to be in God's creation and to help cultivate and make the world a more beautiful place. Talk about the gift of cooking or about how that trip that you went on and, the picture on the wall was such a blessing from the Lord to provide that we could do that. Or, there's so many different ways. If you're intentional to be natural about how the gospel is part of every aspect of our lives and demonstrating that that culture of the kingdom in your home is huge because people can kind of absorb that more than they can just from you telling them about it.
So Laura, for the person that's thinking, when they hear this, thinking, my house isn't nice enough, my life is too busy, I'm too messy, I want to know what to do. How would you encourage someone specifically who feels inadequate in this area of inviting somebody?
Like we said before, I think sometimes the messy home can demonstrate the gospel better than the pristine, everything's in its place home because you're a real person. You're not I've got it all together when you, welcome someone into your mess. So I do take some time to tidy up before I have people over, but I try to be intentional to not spend all day doing that because I want to, I want them to feel like I'm not putting on a show. I'm inviting them into knowing who I really am and who our family really is. So I would guard against that tendency, be real. And then, if entertaining people is something that's tricky for you, something that I learned as a missionary is that the different teammates on our missionary team could help each other with that. If someone had a real gift for cooking or for home decorating or, whatever it may be, we could help each other out with that. I could tell my teammate, listen, I'm really been trying to reach out to this person. I'm going to have them in my home. I'm nervous about what we're going to talk about. Do you have any ideas? Can you give me some tips? Because that's not something that comes natural to me. So lean into your community of faith and be honest about how, you're muddling through this, but you're seeking to grow in hospitality and evangelism, and might have some really great ideas, tips and tricks, and encouragement and prayer for you as you do it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. When you mentioned earlier, speaking of having people even pray for us, you talked about how you had a coworker or a friend that was actually asking people about how they could pray for them. I'm curious, what have you discovered about people's openness when it comes to prayer in relation to people that you're trying to share Christ
Yeah.
with?
I've just seen that almost everyone is willing for you to pray for them. I think even, people who would say they're atheists know that when you offer to pray for them, that's you showing compassion and care. And so I've never had someone say, no, you can't pray for me. I've never had that happen. Something that I've had to grow in is to not just say, I will pray for you, but can I pray for you right now? And, it's like everything, it's baby steps. First, maybe for you, in your growth in evangelism, you just learn to say those words, how can I pray for you? And then go home and pray in your bedroom or whatever. But maybe the next step for you is to actually ask, can I pray for you right now? Because people in general say, okay. And something I got from that book, Get Real, was the idea that if you're out in public and the idea of like folding your hands and closing your eyes to pray feels too like nerve-wracking and weird, he said it's totally appropriate to pray with your eyes open, and that is okay, especially if it puts that other person at ease. And so going to the Father with people and just lifting up their needs, that's one of the ways that I've done that. Well, two ways. I've started practicing doing that at church with people who are a little bit safer because the fact that they're in church, they probably believe in prayer. And so, but it's still like the first time you do it, it feels weird to just pray over someone, in the lobby of your sanctuary. But also when I'm out and about and somebody is asking for a handout or, somebody's in need asking for money, I'm learning to go and just ask a little bit of the backstory of what's going on. And I might, contribute to their need and then ask, can I pray for you right now? And those people, I've always been surprised. All of a sudden, you find out that they believe in the Father and that they used to go to church or this or that. And they share more of, where their faith is or is not because you offer to pray. And they're usually very appreciative as well.
I'm just curious, putting you on the spot here, but is there a story that comes to mind when you offered to pray for somebody that opened a door spiritually that you would not have anticipated or wouldn't have
Yeah.
expected? Just curious.
Well, one instance I think of is I was at a gas station just filling up, my tank, and this man, kind of disheveled looking, walks over and he's looking for gas money, and honestly, his dialect was very difficult for me to understand. So I started like internally praying, oh God, help me to like understand, because he starts telling me some of his story. And I honestly missed a whole bunch of it, but I listened, and then, I gave him some money to just get him where he needed to go. And then I said, can I pray for you? And as I was praying, I felt like the Lord gave me the words to pray truth over him, speaking blessing as a child, as an image bearer, as a person that God loves and has put on this earth for a purpose, and prayed for healing and for hope, for restoration. And I felt like even though I was probably never going to see that guy again, I was able to plant some little seeds of the gospel just by praying for him. And and so that was kind of a neat experience. And I definitely don't always jump on those opportunities like I should. It is definitely still something that I'm trying to grow in. And there's probably just as many opportunities that I fail at. I just am like, I'm too busy, maybe next time. But I think those are opportunities to reflect and grow as well. The Lord's sometimes grown me more through my failures than through my wins. So,
Well,
yeah,
I was
it's definitely a journey.
yeah, it definitely is a journey. I was thinking one simple practical thing that I heard somebody suggest is, if you are going to be praying for your meal, like at a restaurant, why not ask your server, is there something you can pray for them? And I don't do it every single time, but I try to make that more and more part of my practice. And I've been amazed how many times they'll actually share something significant because they're not expecting that. I've even had
Mhm.
cases where servers have said, let me think about that. And I thought, well, they're just going to not do anything. And they've come back with a piece of paper, like, here's what I need you to pray for me. And even some restaurants I frequent often now, I see servers that I've asked that and they will catch my eye and smile or something. I can tell that there's been a little bit of an emotional connection there, that they knew that me and at
Yeah.
least the guest at my table for that lunch were actually pray for them. And who knows how
Mhm.
God might use that, but that's just a very small thing. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
we can overlook, and no real training that we need to pray other than just the
Well,
faith
and from
to,
the other side of that, I remember my first job as a high school student. I worked as a cashier at a grocery store, which is one of the most boring jobs anyone could do. But I had a few different instances where a customer made a comment to me about how they really appreciated my positive attitude or my cheery disposition or whatever. And it's blessed me so much that they would see me as a person in that way. And so I've always been struck that, yeah, seeing the people that are serving you in different ways and like treating them like real people and recognizing them. And yeah, like you said, ask how you can pray for them. That really does go a long way.
yeah. Well, thanks for touching base on prayer there a little bit. Another thing that came from your article that I thought was really interesting is you talk about curiosity as a tool in evangelism, which may be a new concept to some of our listeners, but we unpackaged that a little bit. What did you mean by curiosity evangelism?
I just think there's so much to be said for being curious about people's stories and curious about their lives. I think so much of evangelism is listening and honestly caring. And one of the best ways to show that you care is just that curiosity, like not nosy, sensitive to where the Spirit is, giving you good questions to ask, but be curious about people's passions and loves, their goals and pursuits, curious about the tensions and difficulties in their lives, because those things are all little windows into their heart, into who God created them to be. We're all image bearers, and that shines through all of us in little ways. And those are ways to demonstrate care and concern for people like Christ did, but to build relationship as well and to open opportunities for sharing more of yourself and your own story and sharing about the gospel and how Christ meets us as real people in real situations right where we are.
Have there been any actual specific kind of questions that really you found kind of as your go-to kind of questions that strike at generating curiosity and showing care when you're interacting with people? Is there any that are kind of in the repertoire? I'm just curious.
I mean, I just ask people a lot of times, I want to hear more of your story. Would you like to can we get coffee sometime? I want to hear
Yeah.
more of your background. And I mean, I think especially in our culture, people are so starved for connection, like real human flesh interaction. People jump on that. I mean, I'm excited when someone says they want to hear my story. They want to hear more about, this or that, what I'm passionate about, what are the things that I'm involved in. And so that's my go-to is I want to hear more about people's stories. If I already know something about the person, what their world looks like. If it's a mom, a lot of times I will start by asking about, things with their children. So you use, the intuition that the Lord's given you, but finding ways to dig deeper and try to discover those longings of the heart, those desires, those fears, even because everything that we do in our lives comes from the heart. And so you'd kind of dig down to discover the person within.
Yeah. I was just recently listening to somebody that was unpackaging and talking about how to interact and giving suggestions about how to interact with your child after they come off like a sporting event and they maybe didn't play their best. And it was just talking about how there's different ways you can do that. You can come at them and say, hey, that wasn't, you made some mistakes here. Here's some things you can work on. You can kind of be kind of educational, corrective. You can kind of come at it and go, oh, it's no big deal. Blow it off. There's a game next week, which kind of can minimize things. It was just talking, it was this, now it was an adult person talking about how their parents took different approaches. But now that they were an adult, they were sharing how one of the insights they had that they think was it can be most helpful way is rather than try to fix or try to, you know, dismiss it as not a big issue. It's just if their parents would have asked them, how did that make you feel? Or how do you feel coming out of the game? She was saying that it would have opened the door for them to be able to dictate, for her to be able to dictate which way this direction of this conversation would be most helpful for her. And it just got me thinking about, that's a really powerful question to ask anybody when they've shared something that's going on, whether it's more surfacey or if it's something more deeper, just to say, gosh, how did that make you feel? Or how are you feeling coming out of that? Really is a curiosity kind of question, because sometimes people don't know what they're feeling until somebody asks them. They're like, well, what am I feeling?
A lot
I know
of
that's
us
definitely
need
the
to
case for me.
process verbally.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people are already in their feelings quickly, but some of us, it takes us a lot longer to go beneath the surface. And it can be a really helpful question, not to mention it opens up more substantive issues to talk about and creates an opportunity to be vulnerable or even to connect with them.
Feeling about parenting this week. How are you feeling about work this week?
Exactly.
How are you feeling about X, Y, or Z, whatever it is that is an aspect of the person's life that can take them to where their heart's at real quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I know we like to avoid politics and current events and things like that, but there's a lot going on in our world, even just to go, man, with everything that's going on, in Europe right now, or in the Middle East, how are you feeling? I mean, that's a lot. Just invites people to be able to go beneath the surface and even to know that somebody else is struggling like they are too, or trying to fit pieces together. Because the goal is not to have answers for their feelings. The goal is to meet them in that and have community with them on a deeper level. So I think that's great. Well, Laura, let me kind of bring things full circle here a little bit from our time to ask you, when you think about the church in America today, what gives you hope when it comes to evangelism and making Christ known?
What gives me hope, Scott, is just knowing that all humans are made in God's image. And as such, we all share longings, loves. We all long for connection with other people. We all have hurts and frustrations in our lives. We all want to matter. We all long for purpose. Those are things we all share as humans. And those are all conversations that can take us to the gospel. They're all things that God meets. They're all needs and longings that He's put into us on purpose because He fills those things in our lives. And so I know that all people that I come across, those are conversations, things that all people deal with. I may not be the right person for everybody, but I can prayerfully discern, what is a way that I can demonstrate Christ to this person who's longing for connection, who's looking for purpose in life, who wants to belong. People are not that different from you and me because we all have those same core desires. And so I can have compassion for those people. A lot of times when they have a rough exterior, it's because of hurt. And so I'm hopeful that can be a commonality that I experience with all people that gives me a platform for ministering to their souls and bringing Christ to them and praying Christ over them.
That's great. Love that. Well, Laura, you mentioned also a book. I just want you to say it again one time that was really helpful for you. A book called Get Real, right? Who's that by?
Yeah, John Leonard. He is
Leonard.
actually a PCA pastor, or at least I believe he still is. Yeah, it's called Get Real. And then I'm trying to remember, I think there's a colon. Yeah, Get Real, sharing your everyday faith every day. It's an excellent, super practical book that just gives you all sorts of ideas about how a regular person can do this.
That's great. So I just wanted our listeners to be able to hear that resource again. It might be something to check out with that. And Laura, I just want to say thank you for joining us and helping us see that evangelism isn't reserved for just a gifted few people. It's something ordinary Christians can grow in every day as they learn to prioritize people and to rely on the Holy Spirit. So thank you for taking the time to share with us your journey and some of the things you've learned along the way. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. And thanks to all you who are listening or watching the Road to Missional Living podcast. If this episode has encouraged you in any way, we just invite you to share it with somebody or use it any way you can that will help encourage yourself or encourage others to grow in this mission to more and more display and model and testify to the good news of Jesus Christ and who he is and what he's done in our lives. Thanks so much for listening. Hope to see you next week.
You have been listening to the Road to Missional Living podcast. The Road to Missional Living is a production of Mitchell Road Presbyterian Church in Greenville, South Carolina. We are a member of the Presbyterian Church in America, and we exist to know Christ and to make him known through gathering and forming equipped disciples.